we do these educational webinars typically about once a month. I personally am a big believer in sort of always upskilling folks that sort of work in either pricing, revenue growth management, or sort of the extension of RGM, so things like marketing functions or various commercial functions. And so I'm a huge believer on just spending some time occasionally to kind of learn best practices and things like that, especially kind of in the advent of what I call AI ML democratization, where things are just now possible to do in-house that were kind of previously the domain of other larger companies. And so we do these things once a month, and we have different topics. So the topic this month is all about marketing mix modeling. And so really what we're going to talk about is one sort of fundamentals of marketing mix modeling, which is sort of enjoying this renaissance, right? Especially kind of all the talk of kind of deprecating third-party cookies, et cetera, and kind of the known flaws of multi-touch attribution, right, which was kind of in vogue for the past couple of decades. But marketing mix modeling is really sort of making a comeback, and it was popular kind of in the 90s and early 2000s, but it's kind of a concept that's been around for the last 50 years. And so I have the distinct pleasure to have Jim with me, who's going to talk to you guys about marketing mix modeling, and he's sort of the real expert when it comes to this topic. I would say that's his primary expertise, and that's what he's known for, right? And so I'll kind of do a quick introduction about myself for those of you that haven't attended a Revology webinar. My name is Armin Kokosh. I'm the founder of Revology. And what we do at a very high level is revenue growth analytics, and we help companies in-source revenue growth analytics and management capabilities. And so we're a specialist advisory firm with experts around pricing and revenue growth management, as well as AI and ML. And we're big believers in essentially helping companies upskill their people, upskill their teams, and not just building capabilities, but also kind of building lasting capabilities and strategic acumen for companies so they can be more successful, right? So we're a consultancy that hates PowerPoint. We're all about building enhanced capabilities to manage revenue growth management for your companies better and to drive measurable progress. I'll let Jim introduce himself. He's got a fantastic background, and I've gotten to know Jim over the last couple of years. He's one of the true unicorns kind of in this field, in that he's deeply technical, and he knows marketing analytics incredibly well, but he's also incredibly personable and is able to speak about it in a way that less smart people like myself can easily understand. So Jim, go ahead and quick introduction.
Awesome. Thanks, Armin. And thanks for inviting me onto this. I'm always happy to talk shop with marketing mix modeling and marketing analytics. My name is Jim Genolio, founder of Causal Analytics. I've got my start many years ago, almost a couple of decades ago, in the digital marketing world, starting with search engine optimization, which I kind of quickly transitioned over into the analytics side because it just seemed a lot cleaner and more straightforward. So I spent most of the past couple of decades in the analytics side, web analytics and marketing analytics, before kind of going deeper into the data science areas and focusing on more of the advanced analytics, things like marketing mix modeling and customer lifetime value and things like that. And then recently started Causal Analytics to just go all in on marketing mix modeling. As Armin mentioned, multi-touch attribution is not all what it's cracked up to be, and is certainly showing its age, especially now with things like GDPR and all the things that we won't go into details on that. But really, marketers are starting to understand that they need more than just last click attribution or MTA, and they need a full tool set of ways to measure their marketing. And that's what I help clients do, whether it's helping them build an MMM and take that on internally, or just doing the work for them, or advising them on geolift experiments and doing testing to understand incrementality, or even just doing more advanced analytics capabilities with them.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate the introduction. So guys, again, reminder, there's a Q&A section. You can ask questions. I'll skip over kind of the slides that kind of introduces our companies. You'll have the content, so you can kind of read through. But let's talk a little bit about again, kind of why this topic. And so we've started this this thing called revenue growth analytics maturity. And we did our inaugural study. We did it with roughly 150 commercial leaders last year. We did it for 2024 as well. It's underway. But what we've done is we've assessed companies to date. We've done a little over 225. I think since then it's been more like 250. But we assessed companies around 4 areas, right? And when we think about revenue growth analytics and revenue growth management, again, most people conflate pricing, revenue growth management, right? It's more than just pricing, and marketing is a key component, right? So it's not just about optimizing your pricing and promotions, but it's also about how do you drive commercial productivity? How do you enable your sales and marketing teams to win more? And how do you enable marketing teams to, one, quantify the impact of their work, and then, of course, optimize their efforts to drive more gross profit and revenues, right? And so when we think about RGM, it is really sort of encompassing all those areas. And I think it's really important to hammer home for people that it's not just pricing. And so we started this assessment where we asked companies to answer some questions around kind of four areas. And it kind of gives some recommendations on kind of specific areas on how to improve. But one of the interesting things that we found last year is, whereas companies are, they're fairly decent on kind of this topic of pricing analytics and optimization, or margin analytics and optimization, right? These are just maturity scores that you see on the screen. So, call it 30, 35% or so, a little over a third. They had kind of medium and low maturity scores, right? You really want to be, obviously, at this very high maturity level. And so that's kind of where you want to be if you want to be kind of a best in class company that does pricing analytics and strategy really well. But companies were decent, right? They were okay around this topic of pricing analytics and optimization. They were also fairly decent. Maybe loosely we can say it was 50-50 around their ability to kind of manage promotions and understand the impact of those promotions and deploy promotional dollars more effectively. This is largely for companies like CPG that spend 20-30% of their revenues on kind of promotional things. But one of the things that struck me and struck our team is just how sort of call it immature companies were around this topic of sales and customer growth analytics, right? So these are like how advanced are we in deploying analytics capabilities for our marketing and our sales team to help them do their jobs better, right? And so when we looked at that sort of question, we asked kind of a host of questions around that area. Those maturity scores were pretty bad. So about 75% of the companies were sort of at this medium, almost 50% were at this low maturity level, right? And so what does that mean? One of the fundamental questions that we asked was, are your key teams aware of the marketing spend ROI by, let's say, channel or sub-channel, or perhaps medium, right? The resounding answer was no. And again, this is mostly for kind of mid-market, upper end of mid-market companies. So call it anywhere from about 100 million all the way to 2 billion, right? But still, it was a representative sample of fairly large companies. About 70% said, no, we don't really have a clue. Like we have some PowerPoint slides from advertising agencies, and we have some metrics. Maybe we can track the revenue that was generated by customers during that campaign, or maybe we even have revenues by campaign. Like we don't know how much of that was incremental versus how much of that would have happened anyways. And so this is especially problematic in industries like consumer goods, right? It was 70% that sort of couldn't quantify it. Distribution, manufacturing was actually pretty bad, right? Now, of the companies that said they actually are able to quantify it, a majority of them said we actually use attribution modeling. The question is how effective that is. Mostly they used last touch attribution, which we know is actually fairly problematic and kind of understanding the reality of your marketing impact, right? And then about 20% use MMM or marketing mix modeling, and about a quarter of them use both, right? But this is a big problem, right? This gray area being about 70% is a big problem. And so when we think about marketing mix modeling, right? Again, I mentioned it's making its renaissance. It became kind of popular back in, I think, starting with kind of early 70s, late 70s, right? But as you think about what happened, even as early as, let's say, 5 years ago, doing a marketing mix model for companies was very costly, right? It's not unusual to have it be in the 6 figures and, have it be kind of, several months long and large teams from kind of information providers and, kind of larger blue chip companies that kind of do this work, right? And you get, let's say 100-page PowerPoint slide with, a ton of methodology and a ton of sort of data points, but, very little kind of distillation of here's a 3 or 4 different things that you need to do, and here's the impact that it would create for your company in terms of incremental gross profit or revenues, right? So it's time consuming, not very actionable, very kind of very costly for companies, right? And again, it was mostly in the domain of kind of specialist firms. And in the consumer space, obviously, Nielsen and IRI are really famous for that. And there were a couple of other ones, right? What's happening today, right? And again, there's been some specialist firms around for the last kind of decade or so, but nowadays we have SaaS products, right? They're actually fairly affordable. You can have a subscription for, let's say, $100, $200 a month. But you also have open source tools, right? And then we talk about Robin, which is Meta's open source tools that's been around for their last 5 years, and it's constantly evolving. But Google has sort of their own marketing mix modeling algorithms, and they're coming up with Meridian, which is going to be their latest kind of Bayesian marketing mix modeling version. And so that can be free if you have an in-house data science team that are sort of may not have the right marketing science experience, but they're certainly intellectually curious, right? And they're willing to learn from folks like Jim, et cetera. It's certainly possible to build kind of MVP type or minimum viable product type marketing mix solutions easily, and you can do it for free. Assuming you have all the data, you can do it in a couple of days. And again, when I say MVP, you can get directionally good results. And what that allows you to do is, one, it allows you to sort of rationalize low ROI marketing efforts, right? Or at least able to sort of answer questions like, the digital channel actually seems to be more impactful than what we previously thought, right? Maybe based on last touch attribution, it's not very impactful, but when we actually do some sort of omni-channel marketing mix modeling, it shows sort of greater promise, right? So we need to actually invest more money in Facebook versus divest money from Facebook, right? And so again, I mentioned the open source packages, but the point is we live sort of in this exciting world, right, where a lot of these algorithms are being democratized, they're easily accessible, right? Many sort of companies that are quite innovative and they have the in-house research and the resources to build these sophisticated algorithms, right? They're sharing their code on GitHub, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's quite possible to leverage that and also to essentially modify some of those algorithms for your own purposes, right? So anyways, just kind of a quick background on why this topic is so important. And so I'll let Jim share his screen. I'm going to stop sharing on my end, and we'll talk about maybe if some of this is remedial for you. I promise Jim is going to be able to talk about it in a very sort of engaging manner. But for those of you that may not be fully familiar about how marketing mix modeling works, I think it's going to be really, really impactful. So thank you, Jim.
Awesome. Yeah, great introduction, and I like the context setting there. That's great. One other thing that I've been seeing a lot just in the past week on LinkedIn, it's seemed to have bubbled up in my feed like several times, is a chart coming from eMarketer from a survey they did back in July. Actually, no, it was in September. So an eMarketer survey to 282 marketers asking, one of the questions asked was, how are you trying to augment your measurement strategy into the future? Select all that apply. There were 3 options. It was better, faster, media mix modeling, some form of incrementality lift testing, and the third option was third-party platform agnostic measurement providers. And I like this result because it confirms what I already believe. So, self-confirming is always good. But 61.4%, the top result was better, faster, media mix modeling. And the thing that I like about that is that it sort of shows, I think, a shift in mindset. I think marketers, especially in the United States, are starting to become aware that, yeah, this multi-touch attribution thing that we've been doing the past 10, 15 years, we thought it was great. And we're starting to realize that, maybe it's not what it cracked up to be, and maybe it never really was. And so we need to really start to think about other forms of measurement that can sort of augment our understanding of our marketing performance. And so I think a lot of people are starting to get that message that a lot of us have been talking about for the last several years. The goal of what I want to talk about with MMM is really the key thing I hope you take away is just to get a good foundational understanding of what it is and how it works. I know when I first got into MMM, my initial thought was like, oh, MMM, it's like I need a PhD in statistics and machine learning, and it's so complicated and complex. And I want to sort of dispel some of that and just give you a good intuitive understanding of what it's actually doing. And then we'll look at the data that's required for it, which I think is another surprise for some people, that it's not as bad as it sounds. And then we'll talk about some of the questions that it's great at answering and some of the questions that it's not good at answering. And then I know Armin has some good resources at the end to share with you. So one of the quotes I like to always talk about is British statistician George Box, who said, "All models are wrong, but some are useful." And that applies perfectly with marketing mix modeling. It's just a model. It's just a mathematical function that equates how much you spend in channels to your revenue. And so the way I like to think about it is, think about it as a tool for finding patterns in the data, right? That's what we're doing here. We're looking for patterns in the data and seeing where things line up. So if I were to show you this next slide here, within less than a second, all of you immediately were able to see that, oh, if I spend more in media, my revenue goes up, right? The blue line is how much you spend in media, the red line is your revenue. Very clearly, within less than a second, you've picked up that, we spend more, we make more. And humans are great at pattern matching, especially visually like this, right? We can see patterns so very easily, often to a fault, right? Oftentimes we see patterns where there's really no, there's not an actual relationship, but it looks like there may be, right? So a fun website, Spurious Correlations, you can find out that per capita consumption of margarine correlates with the divorce rate in Maine. Seems like there's a really close relationship there. Or the popularity of the first name Annabelle correlates with UFO sightings in Maryland. That's strange. I'm wondering what's going on there. And my personal favorite, Google searches for why do I have green poop is inversely correlated with solar power generated in Bulgaria. I have no hypothesis around why that might be, but clearly the data shows that there's a relationship, a correlation there, which is all to kind of put a point on this. Again, back to that quote, all models are wrong, some are useful. These are models that at a very basic sense are looking at correlations in the data, right? It's looking at if I spend more in this channel, does my revenue go up? If I spend less in this channel, does my revenue go down? It doesn't mean that it's causal, right? We're not looking at causal models here for the most part. We're looking at models that are understanding the relationships and the patterns in the data. So let's look at a really simplified example, just again to give that intuitive understanding of what we're talking about here. So let's say you're a brand new company, you just launched this week, nobody knows about you, you haven't spent any money in marketing or advertising, and so you've spent $0 and you have $0 in revenue because no one knows you exist. And so you go to your lead marketer and you say, hey, I think we need to spend some money in Facebook advertising. And so they say, okay, well let's spend $25, and they do that, and you see, oh, we got $50 in revenue. Great. A 2x ROI. We spent 25, we got 50 back. That's great. Well, let's spend 50. So you spend 50 and you get $100 back. Okay, this is going great. We can just put $1 in and get $2 back. We'll keep doing this. Let's jack it up to 75. You spend $75 in ads and you get $150 back. Now, if I were to say, what if you spent $100, right? And this is often the questions that we're asking, the types of questions that we're asking in marketing as well. What if I spend more? What if I spend less? What's going to happen? We're trying to sort of read the tea leaves to see, what if I spend this much? What should I expect in return for that? And so, maybe we spend 100 and do we expect to get $100 back? That doesn't seem likely. But is it 250? I don't know. Maybe. Is it 200? So let's just ask that question. Feel free to pop this in the chat. How much revenue would you expect if you spent $100 on Facebook ads? Again, following this extremely simple example with only 4 data points, right? You can only make your decision here on based on 4 data points. But how many people think we would get $50 in return, or $200 in return, 10,000 or 0, or whatever Facebook says, right? So clearly, this is a simple answer. The obvious answer is correct here. Like, again, given the data that we have here, we would expect a $200 return. We would expect that to be the relationship that we're seeing here, right? So let's kind of break this down a little bit and explore, what's going into this, right? We have the amount we're spending on Facebook, which is a variable amount. So we're going to give that a variable and call it X. And we have our revenue. So we'll give that a variable. We'll call that Y. And it seems that revenue is a function of how much we spend on Facebook. In other words, when we multiply the Facebook spend by 2, we get the revenue on the outside. And so we have a very nice, simple, clean mathematical function, y equals 2x. And now we can put any number into x, our Facebook spend, and get an answer on the other side of how much revenue we should expect, right? And you say, well, okay, we've been in business a little bit now. We actually have some baseline revenue. We know that if we turn Facebook off, we're still going to have some sales coming in of $50 a day. Okay, we can augment our simple mathematical function of y equals 2x, and we can just add 50. That's our baseline revenue. We're just adding that in. And so now we have y equals 2x plus 50 is our model for how much we can expect in revenue given a certain amount of Facebook ad spend. All right. I have a son who's in middle school, and I was helping him with his algebra homework a couple weeks ago. And it was funny because he's going through the section where they're talking about linear models, and I looked at this. I'm like, wow, this is really familiar. It's the equation of a line, y equals mx plus b, good old slope intercept form from middle school algebra, right? This is, in its utmost simplistic example, this is what marketing mix modeling is doing, right? We're graphing the relationship between our spend and our revenue here, right? And so to kind of break down the mathematical function terminology into sort of marketing mix modeling terminology, right? Our X is our Facebook spend, how much we spent, and we usually call that the independent variable. And Y is our revenue. We call that our dependent variable. So if you ever hear those terms thrown around, that's what we're talking about here. And we look at the numbers in front of them, and we see that M, which is the slope of the line, we call that the coefficient, or in other words, that's the ROI of the channels, the multiplier of the spend that we get. And then 50, if we look at B, that's our y-intercept, or in this case, we call that our baseline revenue. It's the amount we would expect independent of how much we spend in media. So again, really quickly, I kind of went through that fairly quickly. I'll keep an eye on the chat or questions. I don't see anything yet, but and that's again, we're just trying to give a good foundational high level understanding of what are we doing with marketing mix modeling. So this, again, simple example gives you an idea of what's happening. We're just looking at how much you spend and how that relates to how much you make. Of course, there's more that we do with a marketing mix model. So we want to try to make it reflect reality. And there are certain things, two specific things that we do with modeling to try to account for what we know to be true or what we think to be true in marketing and how it works. One of those things is diminishing returns, right? I wish it was the case that we could just always spend $1 and get $2 back, because then we would go raise millions of dollars and we would spend 10 million in marketing and we get 20 million back, and we just take that as far as it could go. But obviously that doesn't work in real life, right? The more you spend in a channel, the less effective it is. It's the idea of diminishing returns. And so we need to account for that in the model. So the y equals mx plus b starts to get a little bit more complex. There's some more variables that we need to include, some transformations on the data to account for this reality. So that's the first thing, diminishing returns. The second thing we want to account for is something called ad stock. And ad stock has sort of two interrelated components. The first one is the lag effect, right? If I spend $100 this week on TV, that might cause some immediate sales, but it also might cause some sales down the line, right? Someone might see the ad today, but they might not buy until next week. So there's a certain lagged effect that we need to take into account. And again, related to that is the decay effect, right? So the amount we spend today has a certain effect today, but also sort of a tailing off effect as the days go on, right? So we might spend 100 today, and we might get 50% of the sales on that day, but then a little bit the next day, a little bit the next day, and it kind of trails off, usually with an exponential curve like that. And so there's sort of this lag and decay effect that we need to account for, right? So we're not expecting to spend $100 today and get 100% of the sales today for that advertising effort. There's this decay effect. And of course, we're not just spending in Facebook, right? We're spending in Facebook, but also Google Ads and CTV and Spotify and billboards and other out of home, maybe direct mail, maybe we have some TV and radio. There's a lot of different channels. And this is where, if you're just spending in Facebook, you don't need to do marketing mix modeling to understand what's working. But when you have a larger mix of channels, especially when those channels include, harder to measure offline channels, this is where, again, the model becomes a little bit more complex just in terms of the number of variables that you're including. But this is where it really becomes useful. So again, we've already talked about all the math we're going to talk about. This is just to show you that, again, I gave you the intuitive understanding with the y equals mx plus b. in reality, an equation like this is what you would be working with. So it can get, it can account for a lot of the complexity in marketing. I don't want to kind of paint the picture that MMM is just very simple, because there is a lot of complexity under the hood. But this is kind of what we're talking about when we're doing marketing mix modeling. Again, it's just a mathematical equation that says, tell me how much you spent in all of these different channels. We're going to transform it in various ways to account for diminishing returns and ad stock. And then we're going to output how much revenue you would expect to get. All right. So what about the data? A lot of companies that have been all in on multi-touch attribution over the past 10, 15 years, there's a lot of complexity into that, because we're doing user level tracking. We're tracking all of the touch points a user had with all of our ads and whether they bought or not. And this is a point where a lot of times I see, I like explaining this to clients, is that the data that we use for marketing mix modeling is actually a lot simpler. It's basically how much revenue did you have each day, and how much did you spend on each channel each day. And you could also throw in how many impressions did you get in that channel each day. That's it. We're not doing user level data, right? It's just daily revenue, daily spend and impressions per channel. And that's the data that we're working with. Now, it's easy to say, oh, well, that's simple. The data is very simple. And in theory it is, right? We're not, you don't have to get super complex on the data side. But one interesting thing is that even though the data set itself is rather simple, one thing that I've seen time and time again is that a lot of companies don't have this data readily available, right? They go to their ad team, they say, oh, I need how much I spent in Google Ads broken down by channel, by, campaign or by type per day. And so they go into Google Ads and they export a CSV and dump it into Excel. And then they do the same thing with Facebook and with their email platform. And they kind of cobble it all together in Excel. And that can be problematic because it can just be prone to error, and a lot of other bad things can happen. So I'm always surprised that sort of the prelude to doing this type of modeling is that you need to have your data together in a good place. Have a marketing data warehouse, whether it's in BigQuery on Google Cloud Platform, or if it's in Redshift with AWS, or have something somewhere where you're already pulling together all this important data. And that's important more for, for general business analytics, business intelligence, for reporting, for dashboards. And then once you have that there, again, you can do more interesting things like marketing mix modeling. And then again, there's the simple data, right? The how much you spent in each channel, how many impressions you had in your daily revenue. And you can take this even farther, right? You can think about other factors that impact your sales. Things like promotional merchandising support, pricing changes, seasonality, the number of stores that you opened or closed, macroeconomic factors, weather. There's a lot of things that are sort of business specific that, if you have that information, can be potentially helpful to include in the model to help explain what was causing those sales, or what was at least correlated with those sales. All right. So now we have our model, we have our data, we're building our marketing mix model. So I can just go ahead and replace my last click attribution now, right? Let's hold on, right? Let's first talk about what we can answer with marketing mix modeling and areas where it's not as good as we would like it to be. So for high level understanding of your marketing performance, specifically across channels, so omni-channel, as they like to say, and for helping making budget allocation decisions, right? Am I spending too much in this channel, not enough in this channel? I don't know. How do I decide that? If I look in Facebook ads, I know it's biased. So this is the kind of thing that MMM really shines. I like to bucket the questions in these sort of three buckets of types of questions that MMM is good at answering. The first one being around budget, and then incrementality, and then diminishing returns. So on the budget side, we can answer questions like, how should I allocate my marketing budget to optimize my conversions, right? Maybe I'm spending a little bit too much in Google Ads and maybe not enough in YouTube or whatever other channels. I don't know. I think should be spending more here. MMM can help you kind of guide those decisions on where to shift your budget around to hopefully get more bang for the buck. If you have extra marketing budget, where should you invest it, right? What's the channel that has the greatest return for extra marketing budget invested? And the corollary to that, of course, is where we've been for the past 12 or 18 months is if I need to cut budget, which a lot of companies have been going through, which channels should be reduced and by how much, right? Where can I cut budget and see the least decrease in sales from that? On the incrementality side, we can answer questions like how many conversions did each channel actually drive, right? And this is sometimes a nuanced topic that I think a lot of marketers get this, but I'm always surprised that sometimes people don't really consider it because they're locked into that mindset of attribution from the past 10 years, which is we just take all of the sales that we had and we kind of give credit to the channels that came before them. And that doesn't answer the incrementality question. That doesn't say, how many conversions did we get that we wouldn't have otherwise gotten if we hadn't done that advertising in that channel. Now, that's what incrementality is answering here, right? And so what's the incremental ROI of each channel as opposed to just the ROI of each channel, right? Because we want to understand the return for the incremental conversions and other questions around increasing spend, right? If I increase spend in Google Ads, how many more conversions can I expect that will drive? And then this really important topic of diminishing returns and the kinds of questions we can answer here. What's the marginal ROI of each channel, right? I'm always surprised at how little I see marketers focusing on this. This is really crucial, right? If you log into Facebook ads or Google ads and it says, you ran this campaign and the ROI was 2.5, right? And let's say your target your target ROI that you needed to achieve was 2, right? So you say, oh, I had a 2.5 ROI. That's great. I'm profitable now. So let's say anything below 2 is not profitable. You're actually losing money. So we need to make sure we're above 2. And so you log into the platform. It says your ROI was 2.5. That's the average ROI, right? Remember back to that diminishing return curve where at first the ROI is high and then it starts to get lower and lower as you spend more money in there. So what might be happening is that, the first $1,000 you spend had an ROI of 4. The middle $1,000 you spent had an ROI of 2.7, and then the last $1,000 you spent actually had an ROI of 1.6, right? If you're just looking at that average ROI of 2.5, you might think you're doing great, but really that last $1,000 you spent was unprofitable for you, right? And this is where MMM really starts to shine a light on that and start to point out areas where maybe you should be pulling back. Right? And so, yeah, have I reached a level of diminishing returns in a channel? Do I need to start thinking about pulling back in that channel because I'm not getting, increased effectiveness from that spend? Or do I have room to spend up in this channel and still have a positive ROI? So these are the great questions for MMM. These are the kinds of areas where it excels at providing some insights in. But equally as important is knowing when not to use it and the kinds of questions that it's not going to help you with, because it's not a silver bullet. And if anything, I think people are starting to realize that in marketing measurement, there is not a silver bullet. There's no single answer. There's no single tool that you can plug into your system that's just going to give you that one number that tells you what to do. You really start to need to look at it from multiple angles. And in some cases, multi-touch attribution still may play a role in understanding how your marketing is performing. But in other cases, you may need to look at MMM or incrementality testing. And so when I think of when not to use MMM, there are 3 things that I tend to talk to prospects or clients about. And I've bucketed them into 3 because 3 is a good number to go with. So we're looking at too little, too granular, and too long. So on the too little side, right, areas where MMM maybe you're not quite ready for, or it's not going to be useful for you if you have too little spend. So here I put less than $1 million a year in media spend. Other smart folks put that number at 5 million a year. Again, it's sort of business context dependent, but at the very least, I would say at least $1 million a year in spend before you start to think about whether MMM is right for you. If you're spending less than that, the return that you're going to get on whatever you spend for MMM may not be worth the benefits you're going to get from it. But certainly above $1 million, above 5 million for sure, that's you're going to really want to start looking into MMM for that. If you have too few channels, right? So if you're only spending in Google Ads and Facebook, you don't need MMM to tell you what's working. You're going to know just by looking at your own data, your Google Analytics or your platform metrics. They're going to give you a good sense of what's working and what's not. You don't really need to go through the effort of building a model to tell you what's working. But where you get past that, 4 or 5 channels, and especially when you start to incorporate harder to measure channels like offline TV, radio, out of home, direct mail. Well, direct mail is a bad example because that's pretty easy to measure. But you start to diversify in your channels. You have a lot of channels in the mix, and especially when some of them are harder to measure, that's where MMM really comes in helpful. And then the last one is too little variability, right? A lot of times companies will set their budgets and then they just spend at a sort of constant level across their channels without changing it very much. Or along with that sort of variability, they might increase or decrease their budget, but they do it across all channels at the same time, right? When the sales are happening, or when, Black Friday, Cyber Monday is coming up, or whenever, if you're a flower shop, you're going to spend a lot more around Mother's Day and Valentine's Day. And if you're increasing your spend in all channels at the same time and decreasing in all channels at the same time, the model's not going to be able to pick up on which one of those increases of channel spend was causing the increase in sales, right? Because they're all correlated equally, right? Right. When we talk about too little, or the granularity aspect, if it's too granular, right? So MMM is not going to help you with daily optimization. So your ad specialist who's going into Google Ads and creating the ad groups and selecting the keywords and all that, and making optimizations every day, they're not going to look at MMM. That's not for them, right? If they're trying to understand which keywords or ad groups are performing better, again, MMM is not down to that little level of granularity, right? We tend to be a little bit higher level. And then if you're trying to understand the creative or messaging measurement, like I have this ad with the blue background and this ad with the red background, which one's doing better? Again, sort of same as the keyword or ad group level. That's sort of too granular for the MMM to really kind of understand the performance at that level. And then the last one was too long, right? So if you have too long of a sales cycle, right, especially in cases where it's a high priced or considered purchase, um, oftentimes this happens in B2B or account-based marketing where, you might have a 6 month, 12-month, 18-month purchase cycle. MMM's not going to be, it's going to have a hard time picking up on the signals in that. And there's a lot of other things to consider there too, especially in B2B where you might have a whole team of people within a company that are responsible for the buying decisions. And in those cases, MMM is going to be a little bit harder. It's not impossible. There's still times where it can work. But those are some areas just to kind of mentally think, well, I'm in this scenario. I have B2B. Maybe I don't have a lot of sales activity happening. That's another thing where you just don't have the data to kind of support. These are areas where MMM, again, is not always sort of a shoe-in for helping you. All right. I think Armin.
Good. Yeah. Let me, Jim. This is great. Thank you. Let me share my screen real quick. And I do want to address a couple of questions. We had a couple of really good questions. Before I go into my topic, and we can finish this in about 10 minutes, guys. But so a couple of questions. Chris was asking, referring to the initial slide when we kind of showed that roughly 60 to 70% of the companies cannot quantify the effect of the marketing investments, but those that can, about half of them use kind of multi-touch attribution. So Chris asked the question: is it really multi-touch, or are they also kind of considering last touch attribution as part of their kind of MTA capability efforts? And so my response to Chris was, fortunately, yeah, but we actually surveyed some of those responses, and most of it is kind of last touch. So about almost 75% kind of use last touch attribution as part of their MTA efforts, which is quite biased. And then I think the other kind of just kind of ad lib opinion that I would offer on that one is, I think larger enterprises can certainly invest in kind of multi-million-dollar CDPs and Adobe and whatnot that would enable sort of more creative algorithmic multi-touch attribution. One is getting harder and harder nowadays, right? So like you can still solve for some of that using your kind of first-party pixels and kind of commercial ID graphs and hashed emails and kind of connect that to your customer data. But in general, you don't need CDP. So I'm a big proponent actually of using marketing knowledge graphs or using kind of graph database technologies for some of this, to the extent that you can collect the touch points and kind of de-anonymize some of those activities. But I'm actually a big believer in using knowledge graphs and kind of marketing and sales domains. It's still a very kind of underutilized technology. It's mostly kind of used in financial services, fraud, social network analysis, et cetera. It's actually quite powerful for the marketing domain, right? Because you can actually not just use it for multi-touch attribution, like true algorithmic attribution, but you can also use it to answer like a host of kind of key marketing questions about your customer journey, right? And so we can kind of follow up with some more information on that, but I think that's an important point to kind of mention. And then someone else asked about baseline. So the comment was, many agencies we talk to say marketing mix modeling can't tell you what your baseline revenue is at zero marketing spend. Is that true or false? And so that's absolutely false. And then Jim, feel free to kind of maybe make some comments via video as well. But we'll kind of show you maybe an example. But that's really kind of one of the intents of doing this modeling exercise, right? Marketing mix modeling at a high level, right? It's very similar to when you do price elasticity modeling. At a high level, you're creating a demand model, right? And so as part of that demand model, you're going to be left with sort of this unexplained portion. Sometimes we call it an intercept, right? And some kind of marketing mix modeling setups. It's maybe like the trend or the combination of the trend and the intercept. But anything that is not sort of explained by a marketing coefficient or some other coefficient that we include in the model, like pricing, promotions, et cetera, is really kind of your sales that would have happened anyways, right? And so that's absolutely not true. And in fact, part of a good marketing mix model and part of a good kind of marketing insight is to sort of communicate this notion of hey, 75% of your sales or whatever, 50% of your sales would have happened anyways, right? It's particularly true in like retail settings, right? Like in many retail settings, like people are just going to buy in and like go in and buy the product that they need anyways, right? Regardless of your marketing. For like true kind of marketing driven enterprises, like the best example that I can think of is like nonprofits, right? Is heavily marketing driven, right? Well, your baseline is going to be less in that case, right? And your baseline is like mostly people that deeply care about the cause or people that just want to save on their tax obligations that they donate towards the end of the year. But for the most part, like a lot of your revenue is actually truly marketing driven. But it's a long-winded way of saying absolutely not. Like marketing mix modeling should absolutely quantify what your baseline sales should be in the absence of marketing investments, right? So Jim, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, and maybe I'm reading into the question and thinking through other ways that it might be asked, but if you truly want to understand what would happen if you took your spend in a channel down to zero, right? That's also kind of the realm of, marketing mix modeling can give you an idea of what would happen if it says, this channel contributed 20% of your revenue, then you would expect that if you shut it off, you would lose 20% of your revenue. But you could also do that with experimentation to get that sort of ground truth of what actually happens if I do a holdout test, and does how does that line up with the model and what that says. So yeah, I think I could see a couple ways of taking that. And the other thing too is one thing that, and this is sort of ongoing research, ongoing debates, people have varying opinions on this, but marketing mix modeling now is still at best talking about short to midterm effects of marketing. We're not really, except in some maybe rare cases and some really advanced modeling techniques, we're not really talking about what the long-term effects of things like brand awareness, brand building ads, right? We're not talking about when we talk about the long and the short of it, we're talking about the short of it. We're talking about how effective our marketing is at sort of capturing the demand. We're not really measuring the demand creation side of that equation. So a bit of a word salad there. Sorry, but yeah, a lot of things can go into that question.
For sure. Yeah, and that's a great point, Jim. And there's certainly more kind of sophisticated methods to kind of measure that longer term impact brand building. I think part of that exercise is you would need to collect sort of more data, 4 or 5 years of data, and then you probably don't want to model daily kind of spend and daily results. You want to kind of model maybe weekly, so higher aggregated data. But one of the things that we wanted to maybe show you is, for those of you maybe familiar, just sort of a sample kind of marketing mix model output of using kind of an open source package. This is probably the most basic kind of foundational package. put out by the Meta team. It's called Robin. Again, it's been around for about 5 years, and they're kind of constantly making some updates and improvements. And again, like this is, it does a pretty decent job of kind of modeling your demand. And this is just an example using toy data. If you look at the actual results in orange and the actual predicted results in kind of that scattered line, it does a pretty good job of kind of estimating what your sales should be. But like one of the things that it does, right, it actually decomposes the impact of your various kind of marketing and pricing activities, right? And so the person who asked about the kind of the baseline or zero spend impact, for the most part, it's things like the trend and the intercept, right? Like, and it's a combination of those two. And then maybe one can argue that some of the competitor sales as well. But for the most part, you can look at this visual and say, well, in the absence of this marketing spend, I would still generate, at least $100 million worth of revenue, right? At a very simple level, right? That's how you would sort of interpret this. But then, of course, you can kind of see the revenue impact of some of the channel spends as well, right? So that's one of the things that Robin, Meta's marketing mix modeling algorithm, does. And again, it kind of works out of the box, meaning you can kind of run the algorithm, if you will, with even if you run it with kind of baseline assumptions or kind of typical assumptions around decay rates, saturation, you would get kind of directionally decent results, right? You still have to have the expertise around your business and sort of a good intuition of how decay rates are within your marketing channels or how saturation may look like. So you do have to have that hypothesis to kind of get some usable results, but it's actually pretty decent. And it's a fairly kind of simple algorithm, right? For the most part, it's a regression-based model that does some regularization on the coefficients, right? Because many of them are going to be, or some of them will be sort of highly collinear. It's not as sophisticated as, let's say, like PyMC has a Bayesian marketing mix package, which I would actually encourage those of you that are perhaps a bit more advanced on the data science side to use. And we'll talk about maybe the advantages of kind of traditional versus Bayesian methods for marketing mix modeling. But it does a pretty good job of capturing things like channel effectiveness and ROI, right? So what's the share of your marketing spend by channel versus what is the share of demand generation or revenue generation by channel? You can kind of see what the more or less impactful channels are, right? You can model the actual decay rates. Jim talked about, right, this notion of, let's say for TV, right, you see a TV ad, 70% of the impact stays with you the next week. The 70% of that, roughly, right, 49% stays with you in week 3, et cetera. That's kind of the concept of decay rates. You can kind of visualize it. Typically, offline channels like TV, perhaps PR will have obviously higher decay rates than let's say digital channels. Digital tends to be much smaller, and it's also reflected, right, in the actual kind of the decomposition of the marketing impact of the various channels, right? So you look at something like TV, 60-70% of the impact is sort of carryover impact. You saw an ad and then you perhaps purchased the product or the service 2, 3, 4 weeks later, versus something like a Facebook or perhaps maybe search. It's probably more better example, right? Search like 70%. Realistically, it's more like 80-85%. That's kind of more immediate. You search for something, right? You go visit that store, you search for something, you go buy that product, right? It tends to be more of an immediate effect versus a carryover effect. But again, something like a Robin open source algorithm allows you to kind of model that fairly seamlessly. You can also kind of visualize saturation curves by channel, right? So what this shows you the actual weekly spend. This is actual spend that you've kind of done over within sort of the data set that you use for the modeling, and this is the actual response or the revenues that were sort of modeled or attributed to that particular channel. You can kind of visualize, right? Like you can visualize the marginal returns, and whenever you see a line that is sort of this, high slope, kind of goes upwards, you kind of get this intuitive sense that, okay, I can put some more money into that channel and my marginal return will be positive, meaning my incremental revenue that I'm getting off of that spend is going to outpace the spend, right? So there's going to be sort of an incremental profit associated with that marketing activity. And whenever that line starts to flatten out, right, that's going to be like your inflection point, right? That's when you can kind of see like, oh, I should maybe pare back my spend or not spend as much because my marginal return is actually going to be negative, right? And again, depending on what your strategy is, right? If you really want need to hit revenue targets for a given quarter, for XYZ reasons, bonus payouts, you need it for the street, et cetera. If you're a public company, sure, you can generate some more revenue at a negative marginal return. But again, if your goal is to maximize profitable growth and profitability, which is the goal of most businesses, you want to pay attention to that saturation curve, right? So just different kind of saturation curves. Notice with TV, what this little dot indicates, it indicates your average weekly spend level, right? So it kind of tells you like, okay, this is what you're spending on average. So you perhaps have an opportunity to spend more because your marginal return is still positive. Another thing you can do with open source algorithms like Robin, and you can do that with others as well, is optimize your marketing budget, right? So suppose you have a budget laid out for next year. You're sitting in November of 2024, and you want to sort of optimize that marketing budget in a way that kind of maximizes the revenues for your businesses. So you can do that, and you can do that like literally within sort of minutes, right? And so this particular example said, hey, I'm going to spend the same amount of money as sort of outlined in my marketing budget, but help me reallocate that marketing spend across the channel so I'm driving more revenue. And it does that, right? It basically kind of you end up spending the same amount, but the allocation of that marketing amount sort of different by channel. So notice Facebook, we're now spending less. We're spending less on out of home, more on print, and more on TV, which is a little bit weird, in year 2024. But this is just kind of toy data. But you can kind of see where that's going, and of course it'll kind of illustrate what the new weekly revenue that you would be generating as part of your kind of optimized marketing initiatives. And you can also kind of translate or extend that exercise and say, hey, I want to spend an extra, $1 million, right? Or in this case, I want to spend an extra $8 million in the next 90 days, which is a wonderful problem to have, right? How should I spend that money? Right? You can actually go through those exercises and sort of do that with a lot of these open source tools. The last couple of things that we wanted to share with you is a few resources, right? So one, thank you for attending. All of those who registered and attended will get access to a lot of the revenue growth analytics tools and resources that we have. And so most of what we have is kind of in the realm of kind of pricing analytics and pricing strategy and pricing optimization. We do have, I think, a couple of resources for marketing mix modeling. So we have some code that you can kind of go through for marketing mix modeling. I think the example that we have is maybe Robin or kind of a modified version of Robin. So take a look at that. You'll also receive our white paper, which is going to be a lot more detailed and perhaps not as remedial as this webinar on marketing mix modeling. So that'll be out in the next couple of weeks. Jim has an excellent Slack channel on marketing mix modeling, lots of activity, lots of questions and answers. It's a wonderful community to sort of help each other, and especially in the spirit of sort of insourcing these capabilities within your organizations. Whether you want to do that with your data science team or kind of get guidance from an expert like Jim, this is your kind of platform to kind of answer some of those questions, be it strategic or kind of technical. Jim actually introduced me to this expert, Dr. Rama Gerard, who's been kind of doing her own kind of marketing mix modeling practice for the last couple of decades. There's just a ton of content out there on YouTube, right? So these are excellent kind of training and tutorial videos. I would really kind of encourage you to do that, especially those of you that are in a data science or analytics team supporting a marketing organization. Just really kind of encourage you guys to check these out. Really well structured and entirely focused on marketing mix modeling. So it's highly valuable. Check it out. Recast is a kind of one of a few or one of a handful of really, really strong SaaS products that does marketing mix modeling. There's a couple of other ones like Cassandra, right? Sort of makes marketing mix modeling really affordable for most companies. And they have a ton of really useful content, again, around marketing mix modeling, different models, the benefits of kind of traditional approaches versus Bayesian approaches, and how do you think about that, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely check that out. And if you want to actually like play with this a little bit, right? So before you kind of implement this in your own companies, you want to perhaps play with some data. There's a link that you can use to kind of download some marketing mix modeling data sets to maybe try it out first, see how it works, get comfortable with the algorithms, get comfortable with the assumptions, with the optimization modules, et cetera, before you kind of implement this in your own company. So definitely encourage you guys to do that. And of course, the website for Robin, check that out. It's really easy to use. Again, it's probably one of the easiest packages. Of course, PyMC as a Bayesian marketing mix model, a lot more sophisticated. I would say for environments where you have quite a few channels, lots of kind of multi-collinearity between the channel spend, lots of nonlinear relationships, and with the ability to kind of incorporate prior knowledge and assumptions about kind of marketing returns, right? Like, hey, I think the Facebook channel is the return is going to be between this and this, saturation is between this and this, etc. You can just get a lot more flexibility with setting up the assumptions around not just the case saturation, but also kind of the returns, right? So I would encourage you guys to check it out. Again, a lot more complex to use than something like a Robin, but it gives you a lot more flexibility, and just kind of overall, Bayesian is really kind of the way to go for kind of most sophisticated marketing mix modeling. So, Jim, anything else to add on those resources?
Yeah, those are great. I like to say that to get started, Robin is probably the easiest, but then at a certain point, you probably want to graduate up to a PyMC, or hopefully Google will make Meridian generally available. But yeah,
for sure. So again, I want to thank Jim for kind of being here, and really thanks for all of you for attending and asking the questions. You will get the presentation, you'll get the recording of the webinar, you'll get the white paper. And then if you need to get in touch with Jim or myself, there's some information. You can also find us on LinkedIn or I don't know, MySpace. Do you have a MySpace account, Jim? I think I still have one.
Friendster. I think it's Friendster. I have an account.
Friendster. Okay. Good. So please reach out, guys. But hopefully you found this helpful. And again, thanks for attending, and have a wonderful rest of your day.